كلية الفقه الحنفي تقدم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. So today, inshallah, we'll be doing quite a lot of the usul of iftah now. So because this is the part where Ibn Abidin goes into quite a lot of the usul in his poem. So firstly, he starts off this discussion of the preponderance. So how is preponderance done? So previously we looked at books that we look at, which are the Zahir Riwayat and everything else. Now he goes on to mentioning that the books that are there now that are written, the way that scholars do preponderance, how is that? So first he goes into a implicit way of preponderance, that the scholars, they chose to preponderate in implicit ways. So what were those methods that the scholars chose? So we'll go through that. I'll mention it in slight different orders to which Ibn Abidin mentions it in certain things, because I think it's a lot here, and mentioning it in a certain order makes it much more easier, inshallah. Then he goes through the wordings of preponderance, which is the clear preponderance now. So there were implicit preponderance that he mentions, but it's also the explicit preponderance. And that explicit preponderance, how is it done by various books, by various scholars? What wording is used? What wording is stronger than the other? We'll cover all of that, inshallah. Then he lastly then goes into certain rules that he has come up with, Ibn Abidin. And obviously, this is very useful stuff. Ibn Abidin mentions the conclusion of what he's found in when there is a conflict between different preponderances. So there's some scholars preponderating this opinion, some others preponderating that opinion. So where do we go? How do we, decipher this particular, difficult discussion? How do we give fatwa? Which opinion should we choose? So all of that, Ibn Abidin, he discusses in terms of a conclusion. He concludes it in a different order. Inshallah, I will present it in a more logical order. So in case somebody is following the book, they know that I'm not going in the order of the book. You'll work out how I'm going, inshallah. And you can draw it out in a table, perhaps, what I do give in that particular section. And it'll make it easier for people to, inshallah, understand. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. So now we move on to the next part of Ibn Abidin's poem. He then in the Nadhm he mentions of the Rasm al-Mufti, وَسَابِقُ الْأَقْوَالِ فِي الْخَانِيَّةِ وَمُلْتَقَى الْأَبْهُرِ ذُو مَزِيَّةِ. And the first opinion mentioned in the Khaniya and also in the Multaqa al-Abhur, both of these two kitabs, the Khaniya and Multaqa al-Abhur, he says the first opinion mentioned in there are ones of excellence, meaning they're the ones that are going to get preference. So here Ibn Abidin goes on to mentioning the ways to preponderate, meaning how did the scholars show their preponderance when it came to their writings. So he's discussing styles of preponderance here. So وَفِي سِوَاهُمَا, he says next, وَفِي سِوَاهُمَا اعْتَمَدَ مَا أَخَّرُوا دَلِيلَهُ لِأَنَّهُ الْمُحَرَّرَ. And what is beside them two books relied upon is that which they mentioned later, its evidence for, because that is what is written. This will all be explained as Ibn Abidin goes along. It says كما هو العادة في الهداية ونحوها لراجح الدراية. Just as it is the custom, the practice, the habit in the Hidayah and other books like it, due to the evidence being preferred, being preponderated. كذا إذا ما واحدا قد عللوا له وتعليل سواه أهملوا. Likewise, when that which, meaning that when one of the opinions they have given an evidence for, they're given a reasoning for, and the reasoning of besides it, meaning the other evidences, the other opinions, should I say, sorry, the reason for the other opinions, they've not mentioned. They've dropped it from here. They've not even mentioned it. So there are various opinions, and out of the various opinions, they've only mentioned for one of them the reasoning for. So anyway, this is the poem that we now go into explaining. So firstly, understand that what we're doing here is, like I explained, the tarjihat, what we call how to give preference to one opinion over another, looking at the styling of different authors. So there are two ways in which the scholars generally gave preference, two stylings. One is, or two ways, you say, not styles, but two ways. One is by clearly mentioning a preponderance by saying this is the relied upon opinion, or this is the correct opinion. So they would clearly mention a tarjih, a preponderance. So that's one way of giving preponderance. Another way of giving this preponderance was by a indicative way, an indirect way of giving preponderance. So one way of giving indirect preponderance that the scholars chose to do was by bringing the opinion which they are giving preponderance to. They're giving, they're saying that the fatwa should be upon, by bringing that opinion first. So they will mention that opinion first. So some scholars, they chose to write in this style. So for example, Qadi Khan in his fatawa, he writes in this way, and he actually clearly mentions in his forward, in his introduction, he actually mentions that where I found various opinions of the later scholars, I just confined upon mentioning one or two opinions. I only mentioned one or two opinions, and I preceded the opinion of that and brought first the opinion that which I thought which was the most apparent opinion, and I thought that it's the most famous opinion as well, to make it easy for the person who's looking for what the ruling actually is, and to give an answer also to the person who is looking for a answer, just straight first mention the fatwa opinion. Likewise, the author of Multaq al-Abhur, as Ibn Abdin mentions, he also chose to follow this same methodology of bringing the opinion which is relied upon first. Now, if we look, that's what Ibn Abdin mentions, them two authors. When we look at Bada'i al-Sana'i, he also generally does the same, bringing the opinion which is relied upon first. So these are the books that generally mention the opinion first, which they're preponderating. And this way, this method of preponderating is an indicative way, because they're not going to clearly state that that's the preponderant opinion. But we will take that. If we find nothing else, we find no clear preponderance mentioned by anybody else, so then we will say, okay, look, in the Khaniya, he's mentioned this opinion first. So now that one is implicitly preponderated. Obviously, remembering that explicit preponderance will be stronger than this kind of implicit way of preponderating. But we will have to resort to that sometimes. So that is one way of preponderating, by mentioning the opinion first. Another way of preponderating is by bringing the opinion last, the opposite, total opposite of this, right? So sometimes an opinion is mentioned last, and the reason why the opinion is mentioned last is because that is the final word. That's the last one. That's the one that we're mentioning. We're going with that one after having mentioned all these different opinions. So that is the styling of the majority of the rest of the fiqh books. Like you got the famously Hidayah does the same thing. Mabsut in his, Sarakhsi in his Mabsut does the same thing. Likewise, so many others. Kanz, Kafi, Imam Nasafi in his Kafi does this, and various other books. Generally, they will bring the opinion of the opinion that they're going with last. So that's another style, but you have to know the style of the author. Ibn Abidin does mention there that everybody else writes in this way besides the two that he mentioned. I added Bada'i. He does mention Bada'i having done this other style, but when we look at Bada'i, it actually does generally the first style more often than not. Anyway, so that's that. A second way of implicitly preponderating. A third way of implicitly preponderating is to mention a evidence for one of the opinions. So let's say they'll mention two opinions, but for one of them, the evidence will be mentioned for, and for the other one, there'll be no evidence mentioned for. Whether it's a textual based evidence or whether it's a logical evidence, but there will be an evidence mentioned for one of them, or there'll be a illah, a reasoning mentioned for one of them. So when that is done, then you see that that's the opinion that he's siding with, the author is siding with, that's the opinion he's going with. That's why he mentions that one with a reasoning. Whether he mentions it first, whether he mentions it last, meaning, in terms of ordering, but because he mentions reason, then that means that's the one that he's kind of going with. So that is another way of preponderating. Sometimes he mentions the evidence for more than one opinion, but if he leaves off with the evidence that he left off with, generally he mentions that last, because that is like the final word when there's a discussion. So when there's a debate going on, in essence, that the faqih is in essence bringing up that this person says this scholar says that, and this is his reasoning, but that's his reasoning. And he leaves off by saying that. Most of the times he'll be indicating here that this person's word is the last word, in essence. Why? Because his evidence has responded to the evidences of the other. So that's another way of preponderating as well, which is he will implicitly preponderating is that the author will give a response to the other evidences, but won't respond to one of them. He will leave the other one as it is. So therefore, he is not rejecting that opinion. He's not refuting that opinion or that evidence, but he's refuting the others. So that's another way of preponderating implicitly as well. So you see, there's various ways. And last way I would say of implicitly preponderating is when when an opinion is mentioned in the matan, in the primer. So if there is an opinion mentioned in the primer, then again that will be an implicit preponderance, because obviously that is the Zahirul Madhab. That is generally the manifest transmission as we understand it. So these are all ways of preponderance that has been done in an implicit way by various scholars of our madhab, various scholars who wrote these books. Now we continue on to the next part of Ibn Abidin's poem, where he says, وَحَيْثُمَا وَجَدْتَ قَوْلَيْنِ وَقَدْ سُحِّهَ وَاحِدٌ فَذَا الْمُعْتَمَدْ. So where you find two opinions, I mean, two doesn't have to be two, it could be more than two as well, but where you find multiple opinions in essence, and you find the preponderance of one of them, then that will be the relied upon opinion. So obviously when there is a clear preponderance on one side, that's the one we go with. With what kind of wording will we have clear preponderance now? So that's what he's going on to. So before this, we talked about the preponderance that's done in a implicit way, but we know that the preponderance that's done in an explicit way is going to be stronger. So, what is the preponderance that's done in an explicit way? That's what he's discussing here. He says, بِنَحْوِ ذَا الْفَتْوَى عَلَيْهِ الْأَشْبَهِ وَالْأَظْهَرُ الْمُخْتَارِ ذَا وَالْأَوْجَهِ. So he says with wordings like that's the one that fatwa is upon, or it is the most suitable one, suitable opinion, it is the most apparent opinion, the chosen opinion, um, the one with the most correct reasoning behind it. أو الصحيح والأصح آكد منه وقيل أكسه المؤكد. Or that sahih and asah. So the way you preponderate it was through sahih, and it says asah is more stronger than it. So asah is obviously a wording of ismut tafdil, meaning giving it a higher, more higher exaggerated meaning. So it's the most correct asah in comparison to sahih, which is correct. So the correct view, then he says that a most correct view is more stronger than it when the author says asah. And he says it is being said, meaning there's an opinion amongst the fuqaha that it's opposite, the vice versa is more stronger, meaning that sahih is stronger than asah, which he will obviously detail after the poem. Then he says كذا به يفتى عليه الفتوى وذاني من جميع تلك الأقوى. And likewise bihi yufta, that's another wording, fatwa, on it is fatwa, or upon it, alayhi al-fatwa, upon it is fatwa. So them two from all of the ones that were mentioned are the strongest. So from all of the ones that he did mention in the poem, these two are the strongest. So now here he is mentioning in this part of the poem those wordings of preponderance, a explicit preponderance, which are the strongest. Now, I would like to categorize these so that it is a logical, way of understanding which ones they are. I've not seen anyone do it in this way, but I'm gonna give you an understanding of how to, make some sort of hierarchy. You can put it into a table format, or you can just write it out, and it'll become easier to understand which ones are the ones that fatwa is given upon, or which wording is the strongest wording when there's a clash between different wordings of preponderance. So that's generally when you need this. So he goes on listing all the different wordings. I'm just going to mention to you in categories. So first category, I would say that is of wording which gives, which in essence gives ijma, which gives a person ijma. Just understand what's happening here, then you will understand it by examples. So there is ijma, plus there is taqdeem of khabar. So those people who have studied Arabic will understand a little bit that they use a mubtada and a khabar. So if the khabar is brought first, so in essence the predicate of the actual sentence is brought first before the actual subject, the actual topic subject of the actual sentence, the information about it is brought first. So the sentence is switched in essence. So in Arabic, obviously you have to understand it from the Arabic perspective. That is taqdeem of khabar, and there is ijma, meaning there's the wording shows that there's a consensus on it in amongst the ummah. So if both these things apply, that's the strongest wording of preponderance. Nothing can be stronger than this. So for example, we take an example, we understand it through example. If we have alayhi amalul ummah, alayhi amalul ummah. So because amalul ummah should come first. Amal, the practice of the ummah, alayhi should be upon it. So amalul ummati alayhi, that's what it should be, the normal sentence. But alayhi, which is the khabar, which is the information, that's been brought first, is brought out of turn, is come first. So you say alayhi amalul ummah. So when that is switched, that's taqdeemul khabar. And obviously this kind of a sentence gives us a understanding that there is a consensus of the ummah on it. So upon it is the practice of the ummah. So this is the strongest form of wording, or another wording that would be equally strong, alayhi amalul yawm. Upon it is the practice of today. So this would be again a strong wording of preponderance. So this is examples of strong preponderance that's being given here. So the first is where there is taqdeemul khabar, there is ijma' and taqdeemul khabar, both in one. That's the strongest wording of preponderance. Then we would drop a category. Second level, I would say, is of when you have the one of them. So you either have ijma' only, no taqdeemul khabar, or you have taqdeemul khabar and you don't have the ijma' in it. So obviously this would be, for example, amalul ummati alayhi, like I explained before. So that's dropping a rank now because there is no taqdeemul khabar here, but there is still an ijma', the consensus as we talked about. Or, for example, alayhi al-fatwa. Okay, alayhi al-fatwa. Fatwa is upon it. So again, because there's taqdeemul khabar here, but there is no ijma' mentioning here. There's no consensus wording over here. Or like, for example, bihi yufta. On it is fatwa. Wa bihi na'khudhu. Okay, alayhi al-i'timad. Bihi na'khudhu. That's the one we take. Alayhi al-i'timad. The reliance is upon this. Likewise, وهو المختار في زماننا. That is the chosen opinion in our time. So be here because chosen opinion in our time, but there is no taqdeem of khabar. Or وهو فتوى مشايخنا. That's the fatwa of our mashayikh. All of these kind of wordings, they will all fall under this one category where there is either or. Okay, so that's the second category, which is slightly less than the first category of wording. Then we have a third category we'll make, is where you have a ismut tafdhil wording being used. Basically, we're exaggerating, slight exaggeration or a lot of exaggeration is the same, but there's an exaggeration here upon what is relied upon, or the wording of fatwa is used, because fatwa wording is very strong, but there is no taqdeem of khabar. Okay, so for example, al-fatwa alayhi, al-fatwa bihi, yeah, that normal ordering without the taqdeem of khabar, this will now fall into this third category. Or words like al-asah or awdah, the most wadih, the most clear opinion, wal-adhhar, the most again clear opinion. وهو الأوجه أوجه is the most the one that's got the most reasoning, correct reasoning behind it. وهو الأشبه, the most resembling to the nusus, to the riwayah, to the dirayah, like this, the most resembling opinion. The ahwat, the most precautious opinion. Arfaq, وهو الأرفق, that is the most lenient, softest, we say lenient opinion. Likewise, هو المعتمد, because that shows you that that's an emphasis there where that is relied upon now. So all of these kind of wordings will fall into this third category that we have made. Okay, now the last category would be anything else really. Number 4, the simple wordings, like for example, هو الصحيح. هو الصحيح is just the normal wording of preponderance. That would be a preponderance, remember, but it's the in comparison to the others is the lowest in terms of rank. Or for example, هو الاحتياط, not ahwat, not the most precautious, but احتياط. Yeah, this is the cautious opinion. So wordings like this would give us the last category. So this is the different categories, I would say, of clear wordings of preponderance that would come about in fiqh books. As in practice, though, this is obviously theoretically, it all makes sense, but in practice, when you actually do practice, then you will see that there's not much difference between category 1 and 2, because generally they'll either use category 1 or category 2. They won't use them contrasting each other, generally speaking. Likewise, category 3 and 4 that we talked about, they won't come in contrast of one another, generally speaking, and they will all be mentioned, meaning they'll just be used in usage, they use like more or less synonymously kind of thing, right? But in terms of ordering, you can understand, strictly speaking, the way we have talked about it from. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So now moving on to our next discussion. Ibn Abidin, because he mentioned in the poem that some people are of the opinion that Sahih is more stronger than Asah, and others are of the opinion, which the majority in fact are of the opinion, that Asah is stronger than Sahih. So he goes on to explain the reason for this particular opinion. So he mentions that those who believe that Sahih, just merely saying this is the correct opinion, is stronger than saying this is the more correct opinion, which logically wouldn't really make sense, because if a person's saying more correct, then that should be more correct than the other one, right? That's what generally people will think. But why he says that these scholars actually go into this is because they say that what's happening is the scholar who says that this is the correct opinion, the Sahih opinion, they are saying that the opposite opinion, the other opinion, is actually ghair Sahih, is not correct opinion. That's what they're saying. Whereas the other person, the scholar who's saying let's say there's a third opinion, and the scholar is saying that this opinion is asah, that scholar, all they're saying is this is asah, most correct, but the opposite opinion is also correct. Right? Does that make sense? Because the opposite of asah, most correct, would be sahih, would be correct opinion. So the point is that both of these views are correct. Whereas the scholar who's calling this opinion sahih, they are calling this opinion sahih in comparison to the opinion which is ghair sahih, incorrect, invalid. So now the point is that we should be giving fatwa, they say, on the opinion that everybody is calling sahih, at least. Why? Because it's more important to give that the fatwa, because opposite to that is ghair sahih. So if, for example, in a scenario there were only two opinions. One opinion, a scholar says this is the sahih opinion. This one here is the sahih opinion. And the opposite opinion that is there, that scholar then who's saying this is sahih is calling the other opinion ghair sahih, right? But another scholar is saying, well, no, that opinion is asah. The ghair sahih one is the asah. And this opinion, the one that's originally, is sahih. So now the point is that why give fatwa on this opinion where some are calling it asah, but some are also calling it implicitly ghair sahih? That's a risk you're taking. Whereas on this side, everybody agreed that opinion is sahih. That scholar who called this sahih and this one ghair sahih, and the scholar who called this asah will still be calling this one implicitly sahih. So everyone agrees this is sahih. So that's the opinion we should be going with. So that's the bit of a brain somersaulting exercise here, that a bit of pedantic discussion, you can say, that they go into theoretically again. It's all theory, that this is the way it is. When we look at it in practice, then we see, but it's not as simple as that. When we actually dig into the examples of how these scholars are talking, it's not as simple as that, whereby it's it's not always the case. Maybe in a few cases it might be like that, where this opinion is sahih, the other is asah, and that asah one in comparison is sahih, and this sahih in comparison to it is the same opinion which is being called asah is also being called ghair sahih in essence. So that's not really a general rule. It's not a general rule. It's more than that. You have to look at context. You have to look at who's saying it. Is it two different scholars that are saying it? If it's two different scholars, then how can you say that that scholar meaning is saying what we're trying to say here? If it's the same person saying all of that, then it makes sense. But it's difficult to really pinpoint that exactly, that this is the reason. So anyway, majority are of the opinion that asah, because generally it means the more correct opinion, that will be the one that is taken for fatwa. But there could be, we have to accept that there can be an occasion where the other opinion will be taken. So I think this is all that Ibn Abidin discusses in relation to um, the clear wordings of preponderance. Next, right, what we will do is Ibn Abidin, what he does is he does a hasil. He mentions a conclusion to all of this. And his conclusion, he puts it in a, to me anyway, it looks like a very non-logical order. So he'll mention it in an order which is not a progressive order which logically follows from one to another. It's not an easy read. So what I'll do is I'll reorder this all and mention it in a very concise and logical way. So what he's discussing here is wordings of preponderance. So if tashih, in essence, is on one side, so there's multiple opinions mentioned, for example, and there is a what do you call a preponderance done on one side, and no mention of fatwa. There's no wording of fatwa being used here. Okay, so then what's the rule here? The rule here is that the mufti, in essence, has a choice. But following the tashih is better, obviously, right? Because there's two opinions, for example, right? There's two opinions, and one opinion has been mentioned as, for example, let's say they say, huwa al-ihtiyat. That one opinion is mentioned as huwa al-ihtiyat. But the other opinion, not mentioned anything for, not refuted like very badly as well. It's just mentioned, maybe a reason's given as well. The other opinions mentioned, and just a normal huwa sahih is mentioned, for example, right? So a mufti does have a choice, but it's preferred, as Ibn Abidin mentions, to go with the tashih of the scholars that they've mentioned a verification on one side, to go with that. So that's the first category, I would say, where there's no mention of the word fatwa and there's tashih on one side. Tashih meaning there is a preponderance on one side. The second now, second thing that he mentions is that if both words of, if there are two opinions which have both been preponderated with the same wording of preponderance, so the word that's been used to preponderate both sides is the same, and plus the imam who preponderates it is also of the same ranking. They're both the same sort of rankings in terms of what we talked about previously in ranking scholars according to their ijtihad levels and things. So now, again, the mufti will have a choice. The mufti will have a choice because both opinions are preponderant, and the level of both imams who are preponderating is also the same. Then the third level we have here, number 3, is where both wordings, the same thing, both wordings are same on the two opinions, which are both preponderated, but the imams are different level now. So one's obviously of a higher rank, the other is of a lower rank. So it's obvious you choose the opinion, you give fatwa on the opinion of the one with a higher rank. Then the fourth category now we move on to is where there are two opinions, both are preponderated, but one has ijma, a wording of ijma on it. So if one has a wording of ijma on it, then you choose give fatwa on the wording of ijma, right? So alayhi amalul ummah, for example, or something, right? So both wordings, there's preponderance on both sides, but one side has a stronger wording of preponderance in essence. So the ijma wording, as we understood, is the strongest, so we'll go with that. The fifth one is where both words are fatwa. So there's no ijma wording, but there's a fatwa wording on both sides. So here we will choose the one with the khabar mentioned first, the taqdeemul khabar, as we mentioned. So we'll say, for example, let's say the two opinions, one opinion's mentioned al-fatwa alayhi, the other opinion's mentioned alayhi al-fatwa. So the alayhi al-fatwa will be given preference to over the fatwa alayhi. So that's the fifth category we have. So all hopefully following logically through. Then, because they were all to do with the same wordings, all of those were, both wordings were the same. Now we move on to number 6, where now different wordings come about. So number 6 is where you have different wording of preponderance on either side, and the fatwa, there's the wording of fatwa used on one of them. So on one side, the fatwa wording is used. So obviously you have to pick the fatwa wording over the other wording. So let's say one of them says huwa al-asah, but the other one says bihi yufta or bihi alayhi al-fatwa, something like this. So because the wording of fatwa is used on one side, fatwa wording will always be stronger than any other wording, the other wordings, the general wordings of preponderance. So that's number 6. Number 7 is again, the wordings on either side is different. No wording of fatwa this time is used on either side, but they are both found in different books. So one book is mentioning it, relied upon opinion somewhere, and on the other side, the relied upon opinion is mentioned on another opinion. So now we have to look at the context. Okay, this is where it gets a bit more trickier now. So you look at the context and you try to decide which side the fatwa should be on, or you rely upon further books and you start to build weight on one of the sides based on how many people are mentioning the preponderance on this side. So you look at context in essence. Obviously, sometimes it may be that one is Zahiru Riwayah. So obviously, the manifest transmission obviously gets even more preference than the other one. And like that, you have to decide. So this is going to be a bit more trickier, but it's something that can be done. Number 8 now is where again the wordings of preponderance are different. There is no fatwa on either side, and it's in the same book, because previously it was in different books, but now it's in the same book. So now what happens? You choose the one if one of them has the ismu tafdil. So for example, in the same book, it mentions one opinion, هذا هو الصحيح. This is the correct opinion. Then later on, it mentions another opinion opposing that opinion, and it says هو الأصح. So now the asah will be taken over the sahih because they're comparing the two. And this one, asah, will be preferred over that sahih opinion. So that's what we will do. We take the ismut tafdil wording in comparison to the wording which is not mentioned with ismut tafdil. So it doesn't have to be the same wording. It could be, for example, one of them says huwa al-ahwat, and the other one just mentions, for example, huwa sahih. So the ahwat will be taken over the sahih because ahwat is ismut tafdil wording. And the last category, according to what Ibn Abdin has mentioned, is where you have different words, again, different words, no fatwa on either side. It's the same book as well, but the imams that are preponderating are of different levels, different imams. So obviously here you have to look at the level of the imam and you see what the author is choosing and siding with. Because generally speaking, in this particular case, the author will be siding with one, he'll be refuting the other. So you see the argument that's being presented, and accordingly, you have to give preponderance. You have to choose in accordance to that. So this is all the rulings of preponderance that Ibn Abdin mentions here. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. So alhamdulillah, today we went through quite a lot of the usul of iftah here. So firstly, Ibn Abdin, he mentioned the styling of the different authors. So he mentioned regarding the Khaniya, Multaq al-Abhur, how they give a implicit preponderance by bringing a certain opinion first. Then he mentions that all the other books generally, they will mention the implicitly preponderated opinion last. So that's what their methodology would be. And he gave examples of different books that do this, like the Hidayah and other books. And he also mentioned other ways of preponderating, whereby if a evidence is mentioned for one of the opinions and the other opinions no evidence is mentioned for, a reason is mentioned for one opinion and there's no reason mentioned for other opinions. Likewise, if one of the opinions is mentioned in the Zahir Riwayah, then obviously that's also an implicit way of preponderating. Likewise, if he refutes one of the opinions and doesn't refute the other opinion, the one that he has not refuted is again implicitly preponderated. So these are all different ways of implicitly preponderating, which he mentioned. Then he went into the clear wordings of preponderance. So we talked about, if you were to draw it out, we talked about 4 different categories. One is where there is ijma wording and taqdeemul khabar. That's the first type of wording, like alayhi amalul ummah, alayhi amalul nas, alayhi amalul yawm, anything like this. Then you've got the second wording of preponderance, where only one of them are there, either ijma wording or there is taqdeemul khabar. So there you've got wordings like bihi al-fatwa, bihi yufta, sorry, alayhi al-fatwa, bihi na'khudhu, alayhi al-i'timad, any words like this. So these are all wordings, or huwa al-mukhtar fi zamanina, like this. So these are all wordings that come into the second category. Third category he mentioned was wordings of ism al-tafdhil or fatwa used, or some sort of emphasis, some sort of a bit more urgency, emphasis on that particular opinion. Fatwa alayhi or ahwat or mu'tamad, things like this. And lastly were wordings of just general preponderance, no emphasis or anything laid in them, just mentioning like ihtiyat or as-sahih, like this. So these were the wordings of preponderance, the explicit ones, and then he went into different ways when there is ikhtilaf, when there is a difference in terms of preponderance. What do we then do? How do we, decode all of this and get through this? Which opinion is the one that we give fatwa on? He gave around about 9 different rules or different scenarios, what will happen, and then what to do in those scenarios. We went through that as well, alhamdulillah.